Hi, this is Carol Butler on The Carol Butler Show. And I wanted to bring up a topic that I am almost 95% sure 100% of you have never heard about. As you might imagine, because I can't, and this has been not obvious in any artistic or creative thing I've done for decades. I'm a writer, I'm a playwright, I paint. I do a lot of creative things, and I've often and always thought of me as one of the most creative people I know. But last year, I learned something about me that put me into shock because I realized how different some of us are than most of us. As you might imagine, so let me start again, I can't. I conceptualize. As you may or may not know, I've done a couple of white phone, that's what I call them, white phone interviews, interviewing inanimate objects, characters who only exist in my mind. But wait, not my mind. I create conceptually, not visually. That's because last year I selfed in quotes, I hate to use the word diagnose because it's really not something wrong. It's on a spectrum. But I understand now how really very unique I am in the company of maybe 3% or less, and that's the statistics being given out now of the population who are who have, I'll call it a condition, but it's really not that, and you'll understand more in a minute. And that's how it's pronounced, and I'll tell you why in a minute too. Aphantasia, and I should have foreboding music right now. And when I took this test, not understanding what it was to see if I might be, I was shocked. But then to find out I'm in the company of 0.08% to 3% of the people on this planet that don't have a mind's eye. That's right. You go, "What? What does that mean?" Well, that's what I meant. When I took the test, I went, "What? What does that mean?" Does that mean everybody else can imagine if they lay in bed, they can see their mother's face? That they can remember the sunset when they got, married. They can remember, maybe even taste the dinner they had when they graduated. None of these for me. And I never thought it was a problem until I learned that everybody else can do that. And I went, "Oh, good gosh." I did learn about it last year. Aphantasia means you cannot visualize in your mind's eye. And again, apparently in my case, it never hindered my creativity, although my imagination, and think of that word, imagation, imagination, was not something most people had. Most people can think of an apple and see one in their mind's eye. It could be red or green. You might even be able to imagine biting into one, experiencing, "That is so sweet," or, "Ooh, that is so sour." You can hear the sound in your mind, maybe of the crunch of the bite. I can't. Now I can conceptualize an apple, not see it. I mean, I know I could conceptualize a red apple. I can see a shine, but not see it on the side of it. I certainly can't imagine tasting it, although I know what it tastes like generally, and I don't imagine because I don't imagine that it would be sour. Why would I do that? I can describe it. I can't hear the sound of crunch in my head, but of course, I know it. Aphantasia is not a disease. It's a difference in how our brains interact with the world. There appears to be degrees of aphantasia. My first reaction again when I took a quiz on a lark, I was looking up something else. Beware of Google. I took a quiz to see if I had any degree of aphantasia. And initially, it was disheartening. I saw it as a lack. I thought as a painter, a writer, that I had been ripped off and how easy everyone else must have found it, just as you, 98 or 97% of you, find it so easy to think about butterflies pouring from your hand and voila, you see just that. All you painters, you just imagine in your mind what you want to paint, and there it is. Not me. I conceptualize. I can't see it. And honestly, I can't paint what I can't see, although I can start scratching about with a pencil or a brush or a digital pen, and it will lead me to conceptualize, but I've never seen anything until I've finished it. I can think about butterflies pouring from my hand, but I cannot envision it. And if this is hard for you to grasp, let me tell you how hard it is for me to grasp that everybody and their brother can imagine anything they want at any time and remember anyone they choose to at any time. It's not so much a condition as I've learned more about it as much as what I'll call a state of mind, none of us can change. You can't change unless you get contacts, of course. You can't change brown eyes or blue eyes. You mainly are born with aphantasia, some degree of it, or not. Although a study was done of a man who lost his ability to use his mind's eye after a stroke. Although aphantasia was known about in the mid 1800s, yeah, that long ago, probably around the 1850s. It wasn't until 2015 it was given the name aphantasia, and a lot of people pronounce that differently, but I'm acquiescing to the man that runs the Aphantasia network, and I'll tell you about that in a minute too. I'll say, imagine, if you will, or can't, trying to remember your most memorable sunset. I can't, but I can conceptualize. And maybe that's always been my fascination with photographs because most of you, in a moment, let me revisit this thought. In your mind's eye, you can see your mother's face or someone you love. I can't, but I can think about my mother's face, and I've never been without feeling her love. My loves are part of me that's more than visual. This inability to have a mind's eye could, on one hand, be an advantage. Think about someone who suffered a severe trauma, a horrible relationship. It could be for anyone without aphantasia, a horrible, horrible way of reliving something over and over because it's all just an instant away in your mind. I consider myself a very sensitive person. So, not being able to relive awful things, such as experience deep grief, as it were, in my life, I'm sure in my life it's a godsend, but I can recall them. I just don't see them to re-experience all over again, to relive them in my heart. I wish my brilliant engineer father was alive so I could say, "Gee, Daddy, now I know why I struggled so much with math. I could never see the numbers carried forward in my head. I couldn't project the conclusion." Now, if I could write them on a piece of paper, if I could draw them as I thought them, as I conceptualize it, I could work it out. But in, 20 minutes doing calculus or doing algebra, no, I had to have a picture of it. And so now I know how laborious it was for those of us who had no way to carry one step virtually to the next visually. And it's amazing how I got through anything. I feel like disadvantaged. I think most of you, rightly so, have taken this gift, this mind's eye ability for granted. The rest of us have found, obviously, I have a way to experience, navigate without your advantages. And again, most who discover, like I did, that we don't have a mind's eye find it never stopped us from being extraordinarily talented and creative. I do. I won't ever look back and say I have not been, but I will look back and say, oh, good grief, how much easier it would have been. And maybe how much I would have driven myself crazy too, because I understand that everyone that doesn't have this and you do have a mind's eye, doesn't always have control when those pictures visit you maybe in the middle of the night. I know my vocabulary is filled with a file cabinet of many concepts and words and allows me to juxtapose them rapidly, just not visually. So I create differently. I think differently. It's not a deficit. It's just It's just one of those variables in our lives and how vive la différence in all of us. The world presents differently, and I respond perhaps differently, uniquely to art, to smells, to touch, and maybe in one sense, the original experience of anything cannot really deeply be re experienced as the same. So maybe re experiencing is but a copy experience, not as now as real. Maybe, and I've never heard it with an S on it, but I'll try and say it. Maybe we aphantasia people, folks that have aphantasia, appreciate more the moment because it, for the most part, is lived and experienced once for us in real time. Now, if you're wondering if you are an aphantasia person in any sensory way, let me give you two relatively new, because research on aphantasia is new, resources to check out. One is HTTPS, yes, it's secure, colon slash slash, let me spell aphantasia for you, aphantasia.com. And that's where the aphantasia or aphantasia, I have to again acquiesce to the person who is running Aphantasia Network to call it aphantasia, where you can take a quiz and find out if you are one of the 0.08% to 3% of the people in the world who experience not having a mind's eye. And again, aphantasia, I'm giving preference to. Most people who have it don't know it. I was one of them. So I'm not even a year into understanding I have aphantasia. It wouldn't usually be spoken about because it's not a well-known truth. And most of you, again, take it for granted that you had it. Why would you talk about it? It's not special that you're not, it's just that you would never think of not having a mind's eye. I can promise you, though, having realized that this condition is all mine and I'm in that elite group, being told to count sheep to go to sleep was always incomprehensible to me because I'd think, well, why sheep? Why don't I count cats, stars, or falling leaves? Because I never saw them. I could conceptualize, I know a sheep is white, they have 4 legs, and they're wuzzy fuzzy. And I know cats, I can conceptualize them, and I can identify them, and I just can't paint a picture in my mind. So counting sheep, I just thought, "Why are we counting sheep?" That never and now I know why, helped me get to sleep. There's also a website called imaginationspectrum.com, and there you can take a quiz to let you know if you have multisensory aphantasia, and I've decided I do. I've not seen a doctor for this. It's just like, were you born with green, brown, or blue eyes? And do you have a mind's eye or not? I don't know how helpful it was because I knew all this the moment I took the quiz for aphantasia to begin with. So if you don't know about yourself, this would be step 2. Both websites have a membership you can join and pay them to learn more if you want, but most of the initial research appears to be happening in Australia. I've listened to a couple of podcasts, they're both free. One of Jana O'Connor, who apparently I have a lot in common with. She's a playwright, as I am, a comedic writer. That's what makes me a playwright, too. I identified with her. She's a producer of a movie called Picture It, which is just come out of post-production, and I plan on seeing it whenever it's out. And there's a podcast called Aphantasia in Brains that are spelled Brains, and it's a podcast that explores the inner workings of our brains and how film and television portray them. My reason for doing this show is mainly to build awareness of this fundamental way of experience in the world. Teachers, who of course are expected to know everything and account for all the different ways students learn, need to know they have students who have different superpowers than most. Everyone assumes people can visualize. I was constantly told, Carol, just visualize in meditations. That will relieve stress. that to write, I'd have to see beginning to end. You'll never be a writer if you don't start from the end and then go backwards and put in the beginning. Carol, just close your eyes and imagine what you're going to paint. I mean, that never happened. I'd just have to get started. I'd have a concept. Yet, I've written and had produced over 24 plays. I create videos all the time. I write poetry. And I realized, like Jana O'Connor, that it impacted a lot of books that I enjoyed growing up. I did not realize that Thomas Wolfe was one of my least favorite writers. And I thought, God, he goes on and on about this description. I mean, it'd go on for 2 or 3 pages, and I go, I got it, you're in the woods," or whatever. I couldn't see whatever he's saying, I could conceptualize it, but it was boring. So I'm not dissing him, I'm just saying, "Wow, I'm perfect for playwriting," where dialogue, where the mastery of a giant vocabulary and words and conceptualizing can add humor, and I write, and it takes me wherever it takes me, and so far I've been very good at it. At any rate, I hope to revisit this topic. I think you can get a lot of information anywhere. Google it, you can YouTube it. But I think it is important to know that your superpowers are not mine, and I have a superpower you don't. And it's called, just like sexuality, on a scale from 1 to 10, where do you fit? And ultra masculine, ultra feminine. You're somewhere in the middle. There is no normal. This is pretty much the same for aphantasia. I think a lot of people can see something. Maybe they get a gray image of an apple, or maybe they can almost see that sunset. Well, I can't. But then I have a million photographs, but I don't relive things. And I think for this kind, sensitive heart and soul that I know is mine, I think I've been lucky that way. Visualization. I don't have to. I'm sorry, Marianne Williamson, for all the meditations I took to try and sleep. She always started off is close your eyes and see the golden ball and then follow it into this garden. I'm going, let's just get there and go on. I realized I did talk to a doctor about this, and they didn't laugh at me. And they said, we're not well versed in that. But Carol, there are meditations that are verbal, which is why a lot of people do affirmations. I am good. I am smart. I am loving. I will overcome all obstacles. Everything that happens to me today is for my own good. They're mantras that have nothing to do with forcing anyone to visualize something, but it sure would have helped in school for me. But I was a straight A student, so without that superpower, I found a way around it. And let me tell you, superpowered friends, you have a superpower. I hope you take advantage of it. I hope you'll look up Aphantasia. The podcasts are just fascinating. Please go where I've sent you to the Aphantasia Network. I'll have more on this topic as time goes on. Thank you for listening. This has been the Carol Butler Show, and I'm Carol Butler.